Hello, I'm Emma-Louise Coffey and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. On this week's episode, food economist Ciaran Fitzgerald joins us to discuss the implications of dairy expansion on rural Ireland. And I first asked him about employment levels on dairy farms.
Well, it's gone up by about 20,000 jobs because when quotas were abolished and Irish milk had the capacity to expand, you saw a number of increases in employment, not least in milk processing, because milk processing has gone from 5 billion litres over the quota years to almost 8 billion litres now. So there's been about 2,500 jobs created at the processing level. There's been additional farms. And I think, just before quotas ended, we had about 17,500 dairy farmers. We've nearly 19,000 now, so there's been about 1,500 new entrants. All of those farms have employment and extra employment. As dairy growth comes along and the average herd size increases, you go from a situation where a lot of farms are 1 or 2 person farms to farms taking in additional labour. The whole supply chain for dairy ingredients, for animal husbandry, all of that has increased. And I suppose it shows, on the one hand, the significant impact of dairy growth, but I think it also demonstrates, on the other hand, how when you get an integrated industry like the dairy sector in an economy, when it grows, it actually creates jobs upstream and downstream in processing, in supply, and right across the economy. What you've got is about 9,000 direct processing jobs. You've got another 5,000 or 6,000 in milk distribution, exports and services, and then you've got a whole range of jobs right across the economy, which are about the supply into dairy farming, so animal feed, animal husbandry, etc., and all sorts of jobs in the economy in relation to distribution, and even in jobs in your own area of expertise like research and development.
And if we consider and compare dairying with other sectors, are there any other big employers in rural Ireland?
Well, the rest of the food industry is a big employer. I mean, the reality is that when you look at manufacturing jobs in Ireland, which is constantly looked at, for the multinational sector, if they have one job in, say, the pharmaceutical industry, there's probably one other job in the Irish economy. In the food industry, there are 5 jobs. So if there's 5 jobs in manufacturing in the food industry, and there are 45,000 jobs in food, including 10,000 or so in dairy, there are another 5 jobs right across the Irish economy that are supported by that industry. That's what's called the multiplier effect. It means that the industry sources its raw materials in the Irish economy, whereas the multinational sector doesn't. So the food industry buys all its inputs in Ireland. It buys, clearly, the dairy industry buys milk, spends about 3 billion quid a year on milk, buys its services, buys its transport, buys all its energy, etc. So the real, I suppose, core of the message in the piece I've done on dairying, but it's the same for right across the agricultural sector, is that in terms of a contribution to the Irish economy and a contribution to jobs in rural Ireland, the food industry is by far the biggest driver of that. And
to pick up on that, when you talk about the economic contribution, you've put some figures on it in terms of, say, for every euro that is produced in product within the dairy sector, there's a kind of an effect on the Irish economy. And you have also compared that with multinationals and other Irish indigenous companies. Firstly, can you explain what you mean when you talk about the economic contribution?
Yeah, what I'm doing is I'm looking at a number of measures of economic contribution, and sort of the boring bit that I'll just walk you through is that at the moment, when people talk about the economy, they talk about a measure called gross domestic product, GDP, and you'll hear that mentioned. The Minister of Finance every so often talks about this, and the central bank, etc. In Ireland's case, our GDP is heavily distorted and exaggerated by the flows from multinationals, because a number of multinational companies basically transfer price all their profits for their whole European business through Ireland. And what that means in a very real sense is Ireland's official GDP figure is about 240 billion euros, very high figure. But when you take out multinational transfers, which is done by our Department of Jobs and is done by Eurostat, we lose about 120 billion.
So half.
Half. Now, so, on the one hand, you look at the multinational sector, and if you look at all the debates and discussions about business, they talk about foreign direct investment, and foreign direct investment is very good. But if you then look at a more real measure of what a contribution to Ireland is, it would be spending in the Irish economy. So the Department of Jobs does an exercise every year that measures expenditure by all of industry in the Irish economy, and what you'll find there is that the multinational sector spends 20 billion euro. So if you then you want to make a comparison, you take a figure for multinational exports through Ireland, it's about 200 billion. And they spend 20 billion. So what that says is for every euro they spend, there's about 10 cent stays in the Irish economy. Now, if you do the same exercise for the food industry and for dairy in particular, you get a situation where exports are about 4.2 billion, but spending in the Irish economy is 3.8. So for every euro of exports from dairy, there's 90 cent spent in the Irish economy. And that to me is the real impact. And if we're trying to look at jobs in Ireland, if we're trying to look at household incomes in Ireland, if we're trying to look at ways of growing the Irish economy, then you have to look beyond the conventional figure, because it's highly distorted by these multinational flows, and focus in on expenditure in the Irish economy. And when you do that, you find at the overall level that all the expenditure of all companies in the Irish economy in 2017 was 46 billion, which is a significant figure, but 26 billion of that was spent by indigenous companies, and a big chunk of that was by the food industry, and so that what you get is a much more realistic assessment of what's actually driving the economy in Ireland.
And you also have another interesting value that we'd never have discussed here on the show, but looking at the unit value of milk. Again, can you explain what exactly you mean by that?
Yeah, so I did an exercise on the value of dairy output pre-quotas. So for the 4 years or so from about 2009 or 10 to 2015, the value of exports and the value of output was around 1.9 billion. So we were producing at that time between 4.7 and 5 billion litres under the quota system. So if you look then at what happened in 2017 and 2018, we're producing about 7.5 billion litres of milk. And the values are about, the exports are about 4.2 billion. So all of that means that it wasn't just the volume that lifted the value to the Irish economy. The unit value of the output went up. So we went from about 45 cent, which is an ex-Ireland value of it. So it's taking your exports, which are ex the plant, across the range of dairy products. So it's the value of cheese, value of butter, skim milk powders, some impact from the infant formula sector in that we sell on to the infant formula sector. So pre-quotas, we were 2 billion litres worth about, 5 billion litres worth about 2 billion euros. Now we're heading for 8 billion litres of milk, and we're valued at around 4.5 billion euros. So the unit value of output has gone because the product mix has improved. Some of that has come as well from the fact that butter would have been perceived pre-quota abolition as being a problem product, but butter prices in 2016, 17 and last year have been phenomenal, gone up as far as 5,000 euros a tonne. Now there's a bit of a correction in that. So some of it has been a butter price that was better than we thought, but a lot of it has been the investment that took place in the last 5 years, because the investment was not just in capacity, the investment has been in added value products like the sports nutrition and into infant formula products.
And if we look back, what were the lower value products that we had a focus on, prior to this?
Well, the big product mix at the time, pre-quotas for years and years would have been butter and skim milk powder. And we had then cheese would have struggled around 150,000 tonnes. There were always, if you like, I suppose, plans to grow the cheese business, but the cheese business is largely a cheddar cheese business to the UK. So in fairness, as well as, a product mix change that, if you like, dealt with the demand for dairy products globally post-quotas, we've also, to date, managed, and there's been very significant investments in the last 2 years in non-cheddar cheese output, which is hugely significant in the context of Brexit.
And when you mentioned Brexit, on your paper, you mentioned that we have 800 million litres of raw milk coming from Northern Ireland on an annual basis and is processed in Ireland. So just thinking about that product, what's going to happen to that product, say, when Brexit occurs, and I suppose particularly with this no-deal Brexit that everyone is talking about at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, if until things change, what has to happen is, if there's a no-deal Brexit, we have tariffs, so that product will come down to from the north of Ireland to the south of Ireland. A tariff will have to be paid on it, and then the product, if it's exported back into the UK, a tariff is claimed back. Now, usually when there is that sort of trade, you have a thing called inward processing arrangements, whereby there is a process put in place that measures the volume of the liquid milk and has a set of coefficients for the various products. So if I say to the to customs and the Department of Ag, I am going to bring this down, I'm going to make X tons of cheese, provided I can prove that the litres of milk coming down were equivalent to the tons of cheese going out, you could probably come up with an arrangement where you suspend the collection of the tariffs. But that's that isn't in place at the moment. And what is unfortunately in place at the moment, until it's changed, is because of the politics of the border. The Irish government does not want to have border inspection at the border in Ireland. So in theory, the 3 border inspection points in Ireland would be Dublin Port, Rosslare Port and Foynes. Now, it would be absolute madness for milk that's going to be processed in either Cavan or Monaghan or the west of Ireland to come down to Dublin Port and go back up. What has to change is EU regulations need to change to allow a processing facility like Virginia or Bailieborough in Cavan to be nominated as the import point. But at this moment in time, that doesn't exist. So it's like Brexit is just going to be very, very, very difficult, no matter how benign you can make it. And despite the fact, as I said, if you take the investments of the likes of Glanbia in a Dutch cheese project, in a new mozzarella project, and some of the other investments, Carberry are looking to invest in mozzarella. There's been, on the one hand, the dairy industry in Ireland has reacted very, very strongly to try and reduce the amount of milk going into cheddar cheese dependent on the UK, which is great. But on the other hand, even with that huge investment and that huge commitment, it's going to be a big issue for us.
And I guess, look, we've discussed it in detail, the issue of Brexit with our own economist here in Teagasc, Kevin Hanrahan. And I think, look, what you said sums it up too. We still don't know, and it's very difficult to say what's going to happen.
Well, it's not going to be positive. It's a question of how far can you minimise the impact, because who knows what will happen. For instance, if you look at it in a 5-year period, it is going to be hugely problematic if we have WTO tariffs, etc., etc. But you then look in over a 5-year period, what's going to happen to sterling? Because I can't see how Brexit can do anything other than weaken the British pound, and that's an even bigger issue, to be honest with you. Because if we got a free trade agreement and tariffs were waived and we didn't have a crazy inspection situation at the port, if sterling devalues, then the value of all of our exports to the UK come down, and they're still very, very significant. So that's an issue. Now, at the same time, in 5 years' time, will the UK produce as much milk as it's producing currently? If they don't have the EU support system in place, who knows? But it's a mess, and there's no other way of describing it.
And you've mentioned a few co-ops that are, diversifying and, kind of trying to insulate themselves a little bit from, I suppose, their reliance on the UK. What emerging markets have you seen that Ireland are engaging in?
Well, I suppose it's the product mix first and the emerging markets. So, the big vulnerability for cheddar, and I think there was always a need to do a lot of this anyway, when you were expanding quota, is for non-cheddar cheeses. So you have to look at diversification. There are emerging markets in the Middle East, there are emerging markets in Asia for non-cheddar type cheeses. So you have, as I said, you've got a major investment by Glanbia, a joint venture with the Dutch company Royal Aware, in the production of Gouda cheese, Dutch cheeses. And again, there's emerging markets there. And I suppose the benefit of the joint venture is that it's one thing to make a different cheese. It's a huge challenge to market a different cheese. If you've never made Dutch cheese, it can take 10 years to get into some of these markets. If you take the experience of Irish companies getting into the Japanese cheese market, they would say it took them 5 to 10 years to get the taste right, because the Japanese were sort of used to American type cheddar cheeses but wanted a sweeter cheese that we didn't have, etc. So, there's been huge investments made in diversification. There are emerging markets. A lot of Asian markets now are increasing their dairy product inputs, and having gone from, in the first instance, they would buy in a lot of powders. They're now moving to cheeses. But so there's an investment in a new product mix there, and I think that's very, very significant. But it's a 5 to 10 year period. This is all very slow burn, even with huge commitment of resources.
And finally then, we've talked in the past about this product we have to offer from Ireland, and, by and large, we are grass-based. We have a very clean, green product, and we've a very green image. Are we selling that enough to our markets?
Well, I think we need to do more, because I do think that while Brexit is a potential iceberg, I think climate change is a huge, huge issue for the agricultural sector and for dairy. Now, having said that, I think if properly and scientifically looked at, the fact that we have this low emission grass-based system, the fact that grass is a carbon sink, the fact that grass is a sequesterer of carbon, are major benefits. What I can see happening, if you like, is that in the verification of this grass-based system, we're going to have to dig deeper into actual, almost like a BER standard that you have in your house. That product is going to be judged and bought in emerging markets and in European markets on the basis of verified climate change characteristics. And that requires investment. And in fairness, there's a lot going on. And I think the climate change bill and the Teagasc marginal abatement curve are all moves. But everything's going to have to be verified. It's not going to be pictures and videos and soft, if you like, marketing. It's going to be verification of if the science part of it. Now, I think the other great strength that we have in grass-based is nutrition, because in the midst of the climate change challenge, there is also the food, if you like, consumption challenge. And in that context, I think the fact that we have a huge nutritional platform here, I think will stand to us. But everything will have to be verified, validated and measured. And I suppose one of the areas that I would be critical in the last number of years is this famous market that is represented by supermarkets hasn't to date properly rewarded compliance, properly rewarded climate change characteristics. We see liquid milk being sold below cost, and we see milk substitutes being sold at, like if you take a litre of milk at 70 cent and oat juice, which has very little nutrition in it, being sold at 2.70. There is a complete disconnect between the supermarkets now and climate change. That needs to dramatically change, because while farmers are going to have to be more compliant, verification take place, that can't sort of be sustained, and it's not sustainable in a situation where the products are sold below cost. So that has to change too.
Thank you, Ciaran. It was really great to get an insight into what's happening in rural Ireland and the positive impact dairy farming is having on it.
You're welcome.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, and my thanks to Ciaran Fitzgerald for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify, and for more information go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.